All right, in extremely frustrating news, I recorded this game that just happened and had my volume turned off. So all of it gone. So I can't re-say the things I said, right? Said, Jesus. Right? It would be very inauthentic at best and contrived feeling. So instead, we're going to talk knowing what happened and kind of talking about what I think is interesting and how we got here. This was the first Cookie open game I think I've caught, and it was a really nice win for him. Spoilers. Um, yeah, Cookie's going to win this game, and I really like how he played it. He took a hand with three ones to the left and found a way to make it work really interestingly directionally. And I think that was sort of the highlight of this game was Cookie figuring out a way to handle this kind of hand really well, and Vid not handling the directionality of the game as well, despite making a really, I think, natural starter. Um, I do want to say, I think there's a way that we analyze after that is very different than we analyze during a game, and that difference is really important. During a game, it's okay, what are my options to do this? Which is jumping out at me? I'm calculating lines. After a game, if you show me a move and you know it wins or you know it leads to big advantage, we're coming up with the reasons that move works. But the actual skill of thinking in a game is not coming up with ways a move might work. It's coming up with the potential problems with a move, right? It's making sure a move does well against their range of responses and checking for what's the dangerous things they can do. This is the challenge of playing well, is finding ideas for your opponent as well as for yourself. And when we explain something after the fact, I think we spend a lot of time finding reasons for it to work rather than looking for reasons why it doesn't work in a way that not only doesn't mirror in game thinking, but is just really different from in game thinking and I think is not useful in the same way. I think there are people that can explain things and sound really knowledgeable and on the ball about it, and sometimes they are, but it can be really deceptive because they're not doing or performing or showing the actual skill that we're trying to enhance here. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently is how different explanation is than the process of figuring out, and how to make explanation look more like figuring out so that when we get better at explanation, we can also get better at figuring out. And I think something I've noticed is when people are given a lot of explanation, they can improve up to a certain level in various games because they need reasons to do things. We need reasons that something might work for it to be on our radar as something to look for. And so for people whose, for instance, candidate moves are too narrow, right? They're not seeing enough possibilities. We need to show them reasons to make different moves than they're making. We need proactive reasons, and those can be given by explanation, right? Explanation can say, yes, this is a cool and powerful move. Man, Cookie picked up the move card immediately, or at least the video, when the video reloaded, I guess it was 30 seconds in, but Cookie played his next move really fast, and it was a really in my opinion, complicated move, because I think all moves in 5 are complicated. But to finish up on my point before we kind of pull back to the game, and sorry about the video quality, whenever I like record it and didn't get voice and then have to record from my recording, it loses video fidelity every time. So we're going to get to this move because this is the most important move of the game that Cookie just made in 5. But I think if the range of things we're seeing is too narrow, we need to see different ideas than what we're used to explained. Because otherwise we're not going to have it in our like the mind space we're searching, right? Once our range of candidate moves is closer to sufficient, right? Once we're seeing possibilities fairly well, what we want to get better at is kind of calculation and evaluation. And a lot of that is going to be, why doesn't this work? What's the scariest thing my opponent can do here? What's the thing that challenges my idea the most? And is my idea resilient to that? And a lot of that thinking takes the form of trying to disprove your ideas. And you're trying to make it work, but you're not doing it by picking, okay, if they do this terrible move, now I win. Yay, great move, let's play it. It's what's the most testing thing they can do, and am I resilient to that? And that's the thinking we do in game when we're thinking well. That's most of the thinking. And there's a really interesting chess study that showed as chess rating strength increases, for people spending about the same amount of time on a move, the amount of time you spend trying to come up with ideas gets smaller and smaller, and the amount of time you spend trying to refute your ideas gets larger and larger. And there's a very direct correlation between chess strength and how much time you're spending trying to refute your ideas. I think Triple Triad is very similar here. There are things where explanation is really useful. Again, if we need to see a broader set of ideas, we want them to be explained. But the kind of thinking we do in game doesn't look like that. It's what options do I have? What are the problems with them? How can I narrow down to the correct option kind of thing? Okay, that said, I don't really have a good way to handle this right now, so we're going to talk about what Cookie's move did and why I think it's really interesting. The most obvious thing it did is it sets up Cookie to have a move in 2. He did not have a capture in 2 before, and he does now. But I think it does, I'm going to say 3 other things that are quite interesting and contrast it with a move like playing, say, 3A2 1 and 3, which also sets up something in 2, but might not have the other effects that this move has. So, one thing it does is Vid was trying to make the game leftward facing because Cookie's hand is so bad going to the left. So one thing it does is it gets rid of a card that is weak going to the left. But so does 3A2 1 and 3, right? There were other moves that did that as well. But it does it in a way where Vid does not have a natural card to play on the left side of the board. If you went in 3, maybe Vid can go in 7 and keep putting out stuff that's just tricky for you to take. Now, 7147 is really good in Cookie's hand on the bottom row, so maybe there were not actual ways to create that challenge. But 7 is not in a very appealing move at the moment, right? 7 is going to give a free square in 4 without too much counterplay. It turns out 7 is actually the second most likely square to have a tie, because making the game leftward facing is actually one of the few trumps Vid has in his hand after this move. And so actually 2 of his cards in 7 were ties. I don't know which ones. But 2 were. Um, but yes, one thing it does is it makes it hard to orient the game leftward. Something I often say about moves in 5 is it lets your opponent play almost anywhere, and so they can control the directionality of the game. That was me scrolling down to check if same wall was a rule in effect. But one thing that's hard to do afterwards is go in 3 or 7. You can sometimes. Sometimes it's the best move. Occasionally it wins if there's a ton of combo potential. There's not going to be a ton of combo potential here. Occasionally it ties. There are 8 ties this turn. Let's go back a little just to spend a little more time on this position. 3 of those ties are in fact in 3 or 7, 1 and 3 and 2 and 7. But those are hard moves to find, especially when they're low combo potential. If that's where you or your opponent have ties, like that's going to be a tough find. It just is. It's kind of the last squares that most good players look at. There can be specific reasons to look there earlier, but it's a tricky square to find. So one thing about this move in 5 is if the scariest thing to you is more cards either on the top if you had an up weakness or on the left if you have a left weakness, they're unlikely to play another corner card taking advantage of that weakness. So it does do a little bit to kind of dispel the weakness to the left, and I think a really quite interesting way. So I thought that was one interesting effect. Another interesting effect is Cookie has play in 2 and 4, but he does not have play in 2 and 4 necessarily immediately, specifically 2, right? He gave Vid a same in 4. So he cannot play 3A2 1 and 2 very comfortably because 6 1 6 8 and 4 is going to eat his lunch, right? He does have a nice threat in 4. 8 6 8 1 slides very nicely into 4, right? That card was only weak to 5 if it went in 4, and he has gotten rid of the 5 square. But it's really interesting that it gave him 2 in the long-term sense, but he cannot play 2 in the near future. Um, so this move was setting up squares, but it was not setting up squares he necessarily wants to take immediately. The third thing it does, and we can talk about this as Vid plays his move, is it sets up 2 and 4. It's hard for Vid to play 2 or 4. It's hard for Vid to force the action there. Of Vid's 8 ties, one of them was in 4 and none were in 2. Those squares of forcing the action were tough because Vid cannot play 8 6 8 1 and 4 safely himself. 3A2 1 covers that in 7, though also could land in 2 at that point and probably do damage there as well. And his only captures in 2, kind of 4 1 7 7 or 6 1 6 8, have really low numbers facing out. There is no same wall, so they don't get comboed, but they are cards that there's easily a lot of play against. And Cookie is, of course, if Vid goes 2, very happy to play 8 6 8 1 and 4, if nothing else. So it's a move in 5 where Vid cannot force the action by going in 2 or 4. It is very hard for him to take advantage directionally by going in 7, though it turns out that was one of the better moves because it turns out directionality is that important. And that leaves Vid considering 6, 8, and 9. We have covered 4 of the 8 ties. I believe there was one more tie in 9. I don't know which card. That's 5 of the 8 ties. All right, Cookie is already played. Let's go back a bit just so we can talk through this last part. The square with 3 ties in it, and the square that in my commentary, and you'll have to believe me on this, I had settled on as the square Vid should play, is 8. Because Vid's hand is so strongly an up-down hand. From Vid's side of the game, I think the clear sort of story of this game is directionality. He tried to take advantage of Cookie's left weakness, and if he had really committed to that, there were some ties in 7. But after 1 and 5 were played, Cookie's hand was entirely up down. And I think a move like 7 7 3 1 and 8 would have been really logical, where all his cards are really good on the right side of the board, and 8 6 8 1 maybe can do some work on the left, and he has a ton of up down potential. Every card in his hand is better up down, and the only one that arguably isn't, 6 1 6 8, is very happy for most of the cards to be on the left and the right side of the board to be empty. So I think if you kind of talk to the cards in the hand, all of them want an up down game. And if you're choosing between 6 and 8, I think the most important feature on average is, does your hand, and you have to compare to your opponents, because if your opponents wants the same thing, that can change things. But here, Cookie's hand, it's less clear what it wants. And as we see in the rest of the game, 8 7 1 7 was dominant going side to side. Really strong card. So I think Vid needed to make the game up down. And I think the sort of the lesson of this game for the Vid side of the game was the first move was looking at directionality, was making it hard for the opponent who had a weakness going left. But the second move of the game was sort of misinterpreting what directions the game needed. And also that Cookie has this threat in 4. And I did, when I was watching, identify this as the threat. And you really need something that can meet that move. And at this point, Vid is actually just already lost. And I, while calculating it before, went through the basic ideas. But the core thing I came up with was basically 7 is bad because 8 7 1 7 and 8 kills everything, or 7 1 4 7 if he needs to take it. And then Poo Poo and 2 is going to be safe, so 3 is a dead square for Vid. 9 loses to 8 7 1 7 and 8. Any card you put there loses to that because 7 is a completely dead square for you. And again, 3A2 1 and 2, you're going to have a dead square in 3. So your only chance to tie against 8 is to go in 2 immediately, but it doesn't work. It would work if you could play 4 1 7 7 twice. There might be other ways to beat that, but that would be the one way to survive against 8 7 1 7 and 8, but you cannot play the same card twice. 8 7 1 7 proves 2 dominant side to side on the bottom, 3A2 1 proves 2 dominant side to side on the top, and 7 1 4 7 does a really good job of cleaning up anything else that needs to be cleaned up. Probably the hardest line to refute, though not particularly hard, really not that hard, is 4 1 7 7 and 2, where maybe there's a lot of wins, but I think 8 7 1 7 and 3 is cleanest. Yeah, but a game where suddenly Vid's hand doesn't play well at all, and there's just too many dead squares. Cookie is too much outfacing safety and can lock in too much more, and all the potential sweepers are on Cookie's side, not on Vid's. And Cookie goes on to win the game. Vid tries to get 9-1, and Cookie fiendishly avoids it to only 8-2 him. Um, but I thought the really interesting part of the game was the move in 5 and where the ties were in response. And specifically, that directionality turned out to be really important because after 5 of Vid's 8 ties were in 7, saying, I'm making this game left no matter what you want to do. It's going to be forced to be a left facing game. Or 8, which is saying, okay, my hand is just much better up down than side to side. I need to force it into that framework. And from Cookie's side, I thought the move in 5 was really the star of the show this game. I thought it was really interesting. It sort of reminded me of some Akiyama moves in 5, which said, I don't really need to have 2 and 4. I do have 2 and 4, but I don't actually need to, as long as you can't play 2 or 4, and I have at least something nice in one of those squares, and you can't block it. I have a lot of play. This kind of had that feel to me, but a really interesting version where Cookie took a hand that had a real directional issue and made it play fantastically. And he just wins the game very straightforwardly after this move. Um, so he takes a position that I think I'd look at and be like, well, this hand looks clumsy. I don't like the rare in my hand. I want to get that out. And suddenly the rare played great, much to my chagrin, and everything just clicked. Really cool first Cookie game for me to catch. I really like how he played it, and just looking at the hands and the starter, I would not have looked at this and thought, yes, first turn. Sorry, yes, 6-6-7, 1 and 5. That's going to be just a huge advantage for second turn. But that does seem to be what it was, and I think that showed neat understanding, and he played it very quickly too, which is cool. Uh, Though the skeptic in one always goes, if they played it that quickly, did they truly consider all of the ramifications? And the answer is no, but you don't have to have considered all of the ramifications to understand the key points of a move. I think this was a really neat move and a really well won game. And yeah, I liked this one. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. Sorry that I have bad video quality on this.